So, hi everyone, my name is Tim. I put some cards on the table over there if anyone doesn't get to have a chat with me and they want to get my details, so just pick up a card from there. I'm the founding employee of Rezatec from February 2012. We were born out of UCL and have been based up until March of this year in this building. So we were quite early stage in terms of looking at downstream data analytics, and as a sort of a talk for you today, or a quick intro to what we do, I'm not going to give you slides. I'm going to show you some live examples of what we do and how we have got to that point, and then moving forwards in terms of the challenges that we're quite interested in looking to try and answer. We work in a number of different sectors, so water, agri, forestry, soft commodities and so on, but primarily focused really on static land-based assets. So when Sam was showing you stuff like cows moving around, that's not really our proverbial beef. So we're more focused on things that don't move around so much but do change, and therein lies the value that then we take into a client. So if I just log in to one of the platforms that we have currently, on the left hand side here you can see a whole bunch of different examples of the likes of companies and clients and so on that we work for. But we did a project, an ongoing project up in Scotland, and I'm going to focus my talk on the forestry sector just because that's what I know most about. And my background is actually as a post-conflict economist based out in emerging markets on looking at improving natural assets, and that was how the entrepreneur who did then found this company came across me. And in forestry, one of the big issues has not been the quality of people's data capture in the field and going out and putting tape measures around trees and then assessing what that tree is and what its commercial value might be. The issues really have been, is that the most efficient way of doing it? And if you've got large areas, and for example, we've currently got a contract with the government or one of the provinces of Canada, British Columbia, with their Oil and Gas Commission, and we're looking at 20 million acres for them. So sending somebody out in a car to go and have a look at 20 million acres costs quite a lot of money. And the value of being able to scale up what we do based on sampling from the ground and then scaling that up using, I mean, Sam essentially was introducing my company by talking about synthetic aperture radar, all of the multispectral indices and bands, combining those two together, putting in, as he said, a bit of machine learning and creating your own algorithms. That is exactly what we do, and we've been supported by the Catapult over the last few years, and it's been great being based in this building and having access to all of that brings you. But now we're about, having started two of us in the middle of, so February 2012, we're now about 40 staff, and we've taken our own premises on site here, but not in this building. Now, just for visualization purposes, the reason why this is quite useful to clients is that once you've taken a bit of calibrated data from the ground, we can't do much work if we don't have any knowledge at all as to what is on the ground there. So with the plot sampling, which doesn't need to be at any kind of the depth or the degree which currently in the market people tend to sample at, but little pockets of sampling then allows us to use that as training data, calibrate it, validate it, and then start mapping. So here, just by bringing up a few examples of tree species spread amongst a particular area of interest up in Scotland, the value here to the client is they've now got a spread of species which they can see. Now this is a pretty small plantation. Interestingly though, the age, if I click on any one of these, let's say the pocket here, you'll get a little summary on the left hand side of the percentage breakdown of what's contained in that particular compartment. Now this one was planted when, 1996, but they were expecting it to be monoculture, and when you're carrying out samples from the ground, you have to guess what's in between. So you make educated guesses to what's in between. When you're using satellites, and apologies, I'm speaking to a room where I'm just teaching everyone to suck eggs, but because we don't have to guess, it starts making the precision of our results far more valuable. In addition to the commercial value in the likes of harvesting in commercial timber practice, that guesswork can be quite accurate. But what it gives you absolutely no visibility on is where within your compartments or your areas of interest the different species are actually residing. So in 2017, we got contacted because we had done a project, or a funded project, an R&D grant-funded project, funded by UK Innovate, UK Space, and it was known as the Space for Smarter Government. We think that's an excellent programme, and we want to get more opportunities within the Space for Smarter Government. And by its very definition, the idea was that the government, via the UK Space Agency, would give money to companies like mine to research quite interesting projects and try and develop tools that then commercially the government and the wider private sector would then be able to start using. So our idea was to look into the detection of pest and disease and then try and sell that back to DEFRA, because the current methodology of detection of pest and disease, and I think there's even an article on the BBC website this morning where people are talking about there being no more modern oaks left in the country, was to identify and help with mapping broadleaf species. So that's not really been done in any great capacity before, and commercially conifers are of far more interest. So mapping the broadleafs in the first instance was of potential value, but then trying to use the benefit of satellites going back historically. So obviously with satellites, if on a certain date you need to know something and that date is then passed, it doesn't need to matter, as opposed to flying the likes of LiDAR and UAVs and helicopters. And whilst Rezatec draws in all of the available data that might exist around above ground technologies, it's really then moving that up for scale purposes up to satellite, and you can go back historically, and there are some, we're using a lot of Sentinel, a lot of Landsat, and when necessary, if we need to go higher than, let's say, 10 meter resolution, then we can buy it in from the likes of Digital Globe and so on. But our emphasis is on not trying to make things overtly expensive for the client. So if we can answer the question using open source, then we are incentivized to do so. And one of the challenges I would set, I suppose, for the room is that increasing capability of the open sources of what you can actually do with it. So working at a 10 meter resolution, we can't do individual trees unless we start bringing in LiDAR, and I don't know whether you've seen these puck LiDARs that are being flown now on drones that fly below the canopy. Quite interesting stuff, but they're not yet, I don't think, fit for purpose. So they're coming in quite quickly, and they can be incorporated in, but they come at a cost, and that needs to be borne by our clients. And so the incentive here is to try and see what we can do almost at a per tree, tree-to-tree basis, but without that need to buy very expensive incoming data if possible. Now the challenge here was that in, as you can see on the slide, well no, it's not slide, in the platform there you can see Exeter on the map, so Devon, and some sweet chestnut blight was identified, so stress in sweet chestnut, and the process really for analysis by clients there, sorry, by the government, is to go right to the centre of that, go to that tree, assess it's been reported in, called in, perhaps even by a member of the public, go there, and then they, depending on how serious they think it is, they will then create a 5-mile radius out from that point, create the associated circumference, and then walk that entire area looking for other sweet chestnut trees. So first thing, they got no idea where the trees are, which seems a bit mad, but no, don't know where the trees are. They know that there are trees there, but they just don't know what species they are. So they don't know how to go out and look for sweet chestnut over and above walking it. And then secondly, having identified them, making an assessment as to how sick those sweet chestnut trees might be. So just in a very small 10 mile diameter area just south of Exeter, you've got thousands of man hours being spent against a fixed budget for DEFRA, which we then were asked to try and assist. So they were aware of our project through SSGP, so that's one of the advantages of applying through those sorts of programs, because you get publicity from doing it. So they came to us and said, we've seen some of the results, they've been published, we'd like to employ you to go and do this survey for us, which we can then use as our target. So they said, can you map oak and sweet chestnut for us in the first instance? So that was our starting point, and again, same methodologies I showed you for the plantation, but in this case applied to a naturally growing environment. It's very circular because they gave us exactly the same plotted area that they were going to have to walk in the first place themselves. That's why it's so circular. You can view the data that we provide on our platform in a number of different background sources, Bing, Google, Open Map Tiles, and so on. I suppose I don't need to say, but I will. We don't use any of that for analysis. That's not fit for purpose, but it's very useful for visualization. And so we then, quite simply, we had a little bit of ground data to help calibrate. We'd already done quite a lot of it down at Alice Holt in Hampshire. England being a small place, so we're not talking about many contracts in the UK of the sort of 20 million acres that we're looking at in Canada. So the topographically and the growing conditions and so on are relatively relevant moving across from Devon, so from Hampshire, so we're able to use some of that calibrated ground data to help train. We then produced this map in the first instance, just displaying. You can go quite in. It should resolve on the map, and each of these pixels, as I say, is at 10 meters. And even then within forest, you're starting to see a distribution of species based on whether it be oak or sweet chestnut. This for them was game changing, because for the first time they know where they don't need to go and walk. And it's based on, because we're not doing single tree evidential material because of the 10 meter pixelation in this instance, we're doing likelihood of presence. So I'm not going to go into the detail of that right now, but the colour coordinated here it goes into quite a lot of specificity around the percentage likelihood of presence based on the pixel feedback that we got and the phase information from SAR. So the results came back as such, and then we went back historically to try and create a baseline for healthy sweet chestnut, which when I then make the tree species map transparent, i.e. get rid of, I'm left now only in that area of interest, and we'll go into it in a sec. I've only got what we would consider to be sweet chestnut showing signs of stress. Now, when we carried out some of our research initially, we were coming back with different spectral signatures for the same trees, but seemingly showing different reasons for being stressed. So the sort of the photosynthetic integrity and quality and so on was changing, but they were both signs of stress. So we then reported back into DEFRA and said, do you want this to be specifically sweet chestnut blight, like whatever it's called, Cryophonetrica parasitica, or do you want it to include stuff like Amaralia, and we create this more of a stress map? To which they responded and said, well, if you can get sort of multi-range of issues going on, our mandate is to go and sort out trees that aren't doing well. So we turned it into a stress map rather than a sweet chestnut blight map, and then sent it in based on a number of criteria, but fundamentally the length of time we thought there had been evidence of stress. So the longer we thought that stress had existed, then the more we felt that it needed some attention. And we were able, as a result, to reduce their effort on the ground, if I zoom in, from thousands to tens of man-hours, not least because on the right-hand side of the estuary, you can see tiny bits of evidential issues going on. But broadly speaking, I don't know how to do the maths of how many square miles it is on this side of the estuary, but a fair whack. And it's in a complicated dynamic. So it's urban, it's peri-urban, it's agri, it's forestry. So it's not just a case of walking through one forest. It's quite difficult to access everything. And what we were able to do was just pinpoint where we thought there was anything going on. And broadly speaking, on the right-hand side, we felt that there was not much to shout about. So they went out, carried out some validation, but in effect were doing their job. But in terms of validation, they also went to other places just to see whether or not we might have missed anything. Their conclusion was that we did not miss anything. So every alert to stress that they went to was showing signs of stress, except in very, very early stage. So some of the multispectral benefits from the sentinels mean that the photosynthetic quality can deteriorate before it's visible to the naked eye. And obviously then they go and see a tree which looks perfectly healthy. But they did a refresh, because this dates from about July of last year, and they did a refresh 3 to 4 months later, and stress started to become more visible. So that also was of use to them, because that's given them a bit more confidence. On the on the left-hand side of this estuary, with obviously not much going on in the estuary, you've got much more evidence of a problem. And again, quite specific. The scale is telling you where to look. Quite interested. We felt that from a sort of connectivity and habitat perspective, that peripherally there was quite a bit of a problem, and that intimates to us that it's likely to spread faster because it's on the peripherals. If it's contained within to other areas, it's not going to remain isolated. But we're not foresters, and nor are we professional consultants, so we just provide what we find, and then experts in their respective fields go out and carry out their mitigation. And what's the value here is governments working to fix budget, and by having reduced their time spent here, now they can go elsewhere. And so this is now, we're in meetings with DEFRA right now. The only issue we've got with DEFRA, which DEFRA admits themselves as well, is there is a tipping point for the use of satellite-derived data analytics, and I think this is important, which moves things from being a luxury over to a necessity. And at the moment, they're using a very resource-intensive, labour-intensive, cost-inefficient methodology, but isn't deemed to be a waste of money because it's a known methodology. This is still being perceived in the economic climate that we live in as a luxury, and we think we're literally right now, middle of 2018, reaching that tipping point where the government is now going to spend some proper cash on this and roll it out across the whole of the UK so that their team can be sent. Because the other point about this is this was identified as being a problem, but they don't know whether this is the main problem that they should be dealing with in the UK. Until they're alerted to something else, this is what their focus is. And so once the money has run out, because they've spent whatever it is, 4,000 man-hours in this particular part of the country, they have to wait till the new financial year. So the challenges moving forward from our perspective are what can be done to make this a bit more individual tree specific, but without raising the cost to client. Because at the moment we can do individual trees, but not without the rise in cost to the client, and we would like to be able to try and address that. And in some capacity or other to get the message across. And I don't know the answer to this, but in terms of that tipping point, we the catapult is doing a good job of trying to extol its virtues and so on. But I'd be lying to you if I didn't think that there's still a sentiment of luxury versus necessity. And if you're a decision maker and you're in this case, you're an MP or you're within that environment, do you want to be accused of being flippant with public purse, even if, as in this case, it has saved the public purse quite a lot of time, and therefore more impact has been able to be had with the same amount of finance. So that was all I really wanted to jibber jabber to you all about today. Brilliant.